Okay, so to continue. All right, I think we're ready
Good.
then. So we just want to say welcome to everybody that is listening to our recording of It's All Fun and Games Phonemic Awareness. I'm Nicole Ball,
And I'm Carrie Leesma.
and we are really excited that you're here today with us. We're going to take a second. This has a page with our email addresses on, and we are open to receive emails. If you have any questions or feedback that you want to give us, we are open. We always feel like our learning is expanding every single day on this topic. Things seem to change overnight. So, like I said, here's our email addresses, and we're going to just tell you a little bit about ourselves before we get started. I'm Nicole Ball. I'm an educational specialist in early childhood with Fairfax County. My main piece is with kindergarten and literacy. I kind of straddle literacy and early childhood with a lot of work around social emotional learning. I was a former reading specialist at a Title I school, but I was a kindergarten and first grade teacher and a former reading recovery teacher as well. I was able to work part-time while my children were really little and do reading recovery. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss Carrie so she can tell you all a little bit about herself.
My name is Carrie Leesma, and I am an education specialist for dyslexia in Fairfax County. I have been teaching for 20 years, and I started out my career as a special education teacher, really focusing on reading. I got my reading specialist certificate, and I worked as a reading specialist before I came to central office. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about phonemic awareness. Nicole and I have been on this phonemic awareness journey for 2 years. I think like 2 years ago, we went to each other and we're like, we need to really bump up the support for phonemic awareness. And it was such a natural fit with Nicole working with kindergarten. And we started a journey that we thought was going to be just a couple resources and has become like all we do, which is exciting because we both love it. So we're excited to talk to you today about phonemic awareness and how it can be fun with lots of games and learning.
Mm-hmm. It's an exciting thing. And Carrie's going to tell you a little bit about our outcomes for today. We have just a few, and we've also, you'll see we put a lot of the games kind of mixed in through this presentation just to give you a sampling of just easy ways to work on phonological and phonemic awareness.
Absolutely. So our outcomes today, we want you to leave with a better understanding of phonological and phonemic awareness and why it's important. Learn how students typically progress in phonological awareness and explore games that develop phonological and phonemic awareness in fun and developmentally appropriate ways, and learn places to embed these games. So full
That's
doc
always
for
like,
today.
yeah, that's
Full
always like
docket.
the key thing is like embedding these games like across your day. So we're going to try to get you to think a little bit differently about how you might use brain breaks or how you may use transitions in your classroom just to engage students in a little bit of a different way.
Absolutely. We know when we play with games, like you're going to see, these are things that kids will carry on through the rest of their day. And so they may, do it at lunch or do it at recess. And the more that they play with language in this way, the better they are going to become. So Nicole is going to start us off with our first game.
And then I have a funny story about this first game that kind of goes along with what Carrie just said about how you will naturally hear kids playing with language once you start introducing these games. So this game is actually called Nutty Names. And this is a game that works on phoneme substitution. And this is at the higher end of the skill, but kids have a great time doing this. So the idea is that you may have some picture cards in your classroom. And as you can see, we put 2 picture cards up here. We put a violin and a lamp. And the beginning sound of the picture card you choose is going to replace the beginning sound in the student's first name or in your first name. And before you do anything, you always want to make sure that you're modeling these games before you're asking students to actually play these games. And you may even choose 1 or 2 other names to kind of play with before you're asking students to do this. You can think about partnering students if you think that some students may need a little bit support. Hints are also a great way. So the idea is if I pulled the violin card, I would have students say, we would look at the card of violin and we would say violin says, "V." So that sound is going to replace the first sound in our first name. So if my name is Nicole, my name is no longer Nicole, it's now Vacole. So that is a big skill for kids to do, but they like doing it because it's kind of goofy. So Carrie, if we were going to replace the first sound in your name, what would your new name be?
So violin starts with a V, so it would be very. And if I added it to my last name, it would be very Beastma.
Yeah. So this is this idea of just playing with language and sounds, and then we could try it again with another card. So if I pulled the lamp card, we're going to say to the kids, lamp begins like, ooh, watch me. My name is now Luckhole. Carrie, what's your first name now?
It would be Larry, which is also a
Larry.
name.
That's kind of
It
funny.
is. It's so sometimes you make real words, sometimes you don't. And I really like, Nicole, how you pointed to your mouth, because what will you'll notice with phonemic awareness, articulation is really important. And so we want to make sure that students are able to see our mouths and that we can support them. So for students who have a weakness in phonemic awareness, the feel of their mouth is how they're going to support maybe that weakness in discriminating those phonemes. And so going watch me is really important so they can see if they maybe can't hear it yet.
And sometimes that hearing takes a little bit of time. And this
It
is a
does.
funny story, friends, about like when you start playing these games with kids, they will naturally start playing these on their own. And on the playground, one child said that the picture card was P for pig. So they were using the P sound and they were replacing the first letters in their name. And one kid said, it's a good thing Miss Cooper's not here today. So you will naturally hear kids playing with language and they have a great time doing it. So this is just a fun and easy game for that piece. So I'm going to read this quote from the International Literacy Association to you all. And it says, the International Literacy Association maintains that phonological awareness has a critical role in early literacy and language development. Purposeful, efficient, and developmentally appropriate instruction in phonological awareness can support young children's literacy and language development and help them understand how to decode and spell words, particularly when combined with instruction in both alphabet and vocabulary knowledge. And this is from the brief in just 2019. And Carrie and I were really excited when this brief came out because it was supporting the work that we were doing with teachers in our county.
Absolutely.
Carrie, can you tell them some fast facts?
Yes, I love fast facts. I love these facts, and I actually tell them to people who have nothing to do with education, like maybe my Uber driver. And so I just sprinkle that knowledge everywhere I go. So some fast facts, without direct instruction, at least 25% of students will struggle with phonemic awareness. And why that is so important is we know that phonemic awareness is a foundational skill. And students who have a weakness in phonemic awareness have up to a 90% chance of eventually struggling in reading. And so just by doing these games and this explicit teaching early on, we can reduce the amount of students who will struggle with reading later. We also know that instruction in phonemic awareness can accelerate reading and writing progress, which is what I was just saying. And it's not a huge time commitment. It's not something that you have to purchase. Just like those activities that we did, these are some things that you can naturally do during the day, during transitions. It's not a huge time commitment. And then this one's my favorite of my fast facts. Phonemic awareness is a stronger predictor of reading success or failure, higher than even IQ. So even your students on the whole IQ spectrum, you can have students who are, highest level, genius level. And if their phonemic awareness is weak, they will go on to struggle with reading. It really has to do with that ability to manipulate language. And so that's why I'm so excited to share these activities with you, because the support you're providing now is going to have significant impact in the future.
That's great. And I know that even with that last quote you did, a lot of these games also support students' executive functioning skills, such as their cognitive flexibility, their working memory, and their inhibitory control. So not only are you working on phonemic awareness development, you're working on those executive functioning skills at the exact same time. And that made me think of that because I know that executive functioning skills are highly predictive, even more so than IQ. So you're kind of two birds with one stone when you're playing these
Absolutely.
games. So here's our next slide. Carrie's going to tell us a little bit about the difference between phonological and phonemic, because they're kind of like spread around a lot, but not everybody has the clear understanding of what these two terms mean.
And I am guilty of sometimes using them interchangeably, and they are
Me too.
not. So phonological awareness, if you look, is the larger umbrella, and that's the ability to listen, recognize, and manipulate sounds of language. So if you look at that as our umbrella term, what would come under that would be things like syllable awareness, rhyme, onset and rhyme, R-I-M-E, rhyme, those different skills. Also under phonological awareness is phonemic awareness, and that's the ability to listen to, recognize, and manipulate the individual sounds and spoken words. And so, for example, in the English language, we have 44 phonemes. So the ability to recognize, hear those different phonemes, to manipulate them in language, that is phonemic awareness. So if you get to umbrella, larger umbrella is phonological, and then phonemic awareness comes under it when we're looking at the smallest pieces of our sound units.
Kind of like we were just doing in nutty names. That is more of that phonemic awareness, because we're working with just those very small units of sound when we were just replacing that first sound in our name. Let's go on to the next.
And so the other piece with that, you hear the phone in both of those words. Phonological awareness is not phonics. So the difference between phonological awareness and phonics, phonological awareness is only to do with sound. And they say you can do phonological awareness with your eyes closed. And so it's really just doing those activities where we're manipulating the phonemes or the larger units of sound in a word. Phonics is when we add in letters. And so for phonics, you have to be able to match a letter with a sound. And so that's the difference there.
And one feeds each other. So if you're working on phonological awareness, that is going to strengthen your phonics instruction. And if you're working on phonics instruction, that can also strengthen your phonological awareness. And we often talk about, in the research, I feel like changes daily on this, especially at the very beginning, and we're going to show you a pyramid. We work mostly with just the listening part. And you can begin to add in letters once they begin to get higher up this pyramid, but you really want them to be able to do most of their work with their ears and really developing that skill from their ears. And this is how it typically develops. This pyramid, we've kind of changed. It came from reading first many years ago, and we kind of liked, it's a great way to show teachers how these skills progress. Bless you. And one thing we added to the bottom of this is this idea of listening awareness, because we realized that if students weren't listening and weren't able to listen carefully to the sounds of language, even just sounds in nature, they were really having a hard time tuning their ear to these other parts. So we have lots of games that we do that, especially at the beginning of the year in kindergarten and first grade, that really work on developing students' listening awareness. From there, we move up to that idea of that rhyme and alliteration, then to word and syllable awareness. And you can see on the side of the pyramid here, we put the power skills of blending and segmenting. So once students get to that like segmenting place, you want to work with blending and segmenting, because those are the skills that are going to give you your biggest bang for your buck. And then from there, onset and rhyme, and all the way up to that phonemic awareness that's underneath. So this is your whole phonological awareness, and phonemic awareness is at the top of the pyramid. I'm trying to think what else. These are not skills that they have to master before they move up the pyramid. it's just kind of to show you that it's really those larger pieces of language to the smaller pieces of language that kids develop.
And I think on the next slide, we're going to show you how you would work through those.
Yeah. So we have like that idea, and we put these fish, these 3 sizes of fish here, because you're going to work with large pieces of language to the small pieces of language. And then when you're working in these concepts too, you want to think about working with initial sounds first, and then to final sounds, and then to medial sounds. So just as like when you're thinking of students progressing in their writing, they usually start to hear those initial sounds first, and then they can start to begin to hear those end sounds, and then they kind of start writing those medial sounds. It's the same with phonological awareness. You wouldn't want to start with final sounds of words. You're going to start with those initial sounds of words like we did in nutty names. That is the easiest for students to do. And we kind of talked about this one day, about how when children are born, when they're babies, they kind of babble, right? With those like really like blah, 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 those really small pieces of language. And it's like almost like a curve. Then they get to the bigger pieces of language,
Yep.
and then we get them back to those small pieces of language. So it's kind of amazing to think about how they develop with their
Absolutely.
language skills.
And so on this slide, we take language from those larger pieces and show how you narrow it down to get it smaller. And so some students may not be ready to work at that phoneme level. And so the larger pieces of units you may work with are like compound words. So if I were doing a blending activity, I might say cup, say cake. Now say cup, cake together, cupcake. And for our English language learners, sometimes that is an entry point for them because those units of sound hold more meaning. And so from there, we move to syllables. And so, for example, in the word butterfly, butterfly, that would be another unit of speech sounds that you would move down from compound words. And that line between compound words and syllables, compound words generally hold meaningful pieces, and syllables don't always hold meaning, like but his kids would have a representation of that, but like isn't necessarily something that may hold meaning. And so from syllables, then we move to onset rhyme, R-I-M-E, I would say that. And so, the onset is everything before the vowel, the rhyme is everything from the vowel on. And so once again, you see it's getting smaller, that piece of language that we're manipulating. And then finally, ending at phonemes. And so like, okay, so that is the trickiest for students, but it's also the most powerful. And that's where we get to our power skills of blending and segmenting. And so sometimes, especially if you're working with an older student who may struggle with phonological or phonemic awareness, we know we want to get to blending and segmenting as soon as we can. So going through these units of sounds, maybe how you start. So they're not quite ready for phonemes, so maybe you start working with onset and rhyme until they're able to develop that phoneme awareness. And so we just wanted to give you an example of the different units of sounds that you can work with. So even all of these activities, I would say, minus maybe the first one, you can substitute these different units of sound to play with.
It's really helpful when teachers understand this idea of working with these larger chunks to these smaller chunks, because sometimes we like to start at that really high level, and then we are like really concerned on why a student's struggling with that, and we realize we started at a very high level and they need some additional scaffolds. So this is another game called Noisemakers. And this is the idea, we're at the bottom of the pyramid, the idea of listening. And this is a game that builds students' listening awareness. And you would pull a picture card. You might have a picture card of clapping hands or patting knees. And you're going to tell students that when you show an action, they can perform that action when you say noisemakers on. So if I were to say to Carrie, we're going to clap our hands when I say noisemakers on. So Carrie, noisemakers on, she claps her hand. And when I say noisemakers off, they have to stop. that action. Again, this is something you're going to want to model. And again, this is another thing that really works on kids, that impulse control for kids, because they want to make those noisemakers go on. So if you have picture cards, you don't even have to say the words. They can even just be looking up to see what the action is that they need to perform. But this is another great way at the beginning of the year, especially with our youngest learners, to see who needs that support with listening awareness. So again, it's called Noisemakers, a fun game. One of the other things we wanted to talk about is that all of this begins with that idea of exposure with students. This is just a poem here with children's names. And there's a progression within those pyramids. And Carrie and I always talk about the importance of this. It works from exposure, where we kind of immerse students in the learning. So if we're going to work on rhyme, we are hoping that we have been doing lots of work with poems that include rhyme. So they're beginning to attune their ear. From there, it goes to recognition and production. And I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like at each level. So if I'm just working on a poem, maybe it's like Jack and Jill, and that would be that exposure idea. But if I said to kids, do Jill and Hill rhyme, give me a thumbs up if they do, that's that idea of recognition. So they can recognize that 2 words. But if I said to a student, what word might rhyme with hill? Can you give me another word that rhymes with hill? That's a production part. And sometimes as teachers, we start at that production level. We say to kids, give me a word that rhymes with cat, or give me a word that rhymes with door. And we haven't done that work of really exposing kids to rhyme and building their ear for rhyme. And that recognition where you play some games where they maybe are doing matching games. So we want to make sure whenever you're doing this instruction, especially if a student is struggling, that you have spent time at that exposure level and that recognition level before you're asking students to do that producing.
And Nicole brought up the example of rhyme, and I think that's really important. We know that the production of rhyme doesn't, students aren't developmentally able to do that until usually a little later. And for our English language learners, especially English language learners that don't have rhyme in their native language, they may struggle with that for a long period of time. So we don't, I always want to say, we don't want to hang out and rhyme forever, because rhyme isn't a power skill. It's not going to support decoding and spelling. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
For sure, because I think many teachers think that, well, they're still not getting rhyme, I can't move on to these other things. So you're going to want to keep that exposure piece and maybe some games that go into that recognition piece, so that they can build up to that production piece.
Absolutely.
But it's not like, I feel teachers get very concerned with that, and that is, not where our concern needs to lie. We definitely want to play games that build that, but like Carrie said, we want to get up to that blended in segment.
Absolutely. And so with the same thing, when we talk about explicit teaching, so a lot of our games are ways that the students can play and practice with language, but you always want to start with the explicit language and then use that gradual release model before we're asking students to do that recognition or production. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that explicit instruction is. And so when we explicitly teach a concept, the first thing we do is we state the objectives. So, today, boys and girls, I'm going to talk to you about how we can make these small sounds go together and make them into words. Okay, so it doesn't have to be like very like we are going to take the phonemes and CVC words and blend them together. But it's just telling students this is what we're going to be learning today. And then we're going to break the learning into chunks. We're not going to cover all of blending in one day. Developmentally, students may not be able to, master all of those skills or even understand them all at once. So we're going to break that learning into chunks that's going to build on each of the concepts that we have previously taught to the next one. We're going to do lots of modeling. And when we model, we're going to say, like I said, if I'm blending, taking these sounds together like g, g, ug, bug. That would be me modeling that sound of blending and then thinking aloud the process. So for example, if we were doing the think aloud for that first game, like, I know violin starts with a v, and then my name is Carrie, and Carrie starts with a k, but I want to change that k to a then it would be very. So that just thinking out loud, that process that our brains do super quickly, but we want to make that clear for students what we did to get to that output. And then we want to provide lots of opportunities for practice, and that is over distributed over many days. So it's not like we did blending this week and we're done. You, especially with those power skills of blending and segmenting, we want to do that over and over and over again. So students have multiple opportunities for practice. And we want to give students feedback. So we want to say, oh, that was really close. I saw what you did, and then correct them right away so that they have the opportunity to, we don't want them to, internalize anything in error and do it long term. And so those are really the steps for explicit instruction. And I believe
Yeah, and with our games, a lot of these are games that you're going to play after you've had some explicit instruction in these fields. So it's not like you're just kind of plopping these games down without having some of that instruction beforehand. These are ways to reinforce the concepts that you have taught. So we just want to make sure that is like very clear that these are ways to kind of reinforce throughout your day.
Absolutely. And so we're going to talk like this is what some explicit language sounds like. So instead, you would say for rhyming words sound the same in the middle and at the end of a word. Listen to these two words, cat and rat. Can you hear how they sound the same at the middle and the end? So we don't want to say, oh, rhyming words sound the same at the end, because that could be the t sound. What we want to say is that rhyming actually has to do with R-I-M-E, that at sound. So that explicit language makes it very clear for students what we're talking about. Or we can listen carefully to the beginning of a word to hear the first sound. Listen carefully to the words mouse and map. Can you hear the sound? They sound the same at the beginning. Okay, so that clear language of what we're looking for, and then saying, always modeling. For those words, what do I hear? Mouse, map. I keep hearing that sound. That must be the sound that's at the beginning of both. Or words have parts called syllables, and we can put our hands under our chin to feel the parts of a word. Watch and listen as I show you. Butterfly. Butterfly. Do you see how my mouth went down 3 times? That means that word has 3 syllables. And so that explicit language and that modeling are really critical especially for the students who may struggle in this area, and to make it clear, oh, okay, that's how that works.
And I think it's important because the language helps to make things very clear for kids, like Carrie said, and we want to be consistent with that language so that we're using that same language each time and we're not changing back and forth, because that can be really confusing for kids.
Absolutely.
So when you're playing the games, this explicit language, guys, we're going to play a rhyming game today. Remember, rhyming words sound the same in the middle and at the end. So it kind of like, oh, that's right. Those are those rhyming words. So it's really important to use that language. And Carrie's going to show you a game called Let's Go Shopping. This is more of a production game though. So this would be at that higher end.
Yes.
You probably would not want to do this right like at the beginning of kindergarten, because they're going to probably look at you like your head's chopped off.
Absolutely. And so just as you go through some of these games that you will have access to, just remember, think about where this is on that developmental progression. And we don't want to introduce something that may be frustrating for a lot of kids first. So with this game, you would have students sit in a circle, and you would begin with a starter sentence like, I'm going shopping for cheese. And so you would have a ball or something, and you would toss the ball to a student, and they must first repeat your sentence. So they would say, I'm going shopping for cheese. And then they would produce a word that rhymes with the last word. So I let's go shopping for peas. And if you have an IA or instructional assistant working with you, you may start off the game with them, and so that they can model. And then that student's going to toss the ball back to the teacher, and then the teacher will repeat the original sentence saying, I'm going shopping for cheese. Let's go shopping for peas. And then they would toss the ball to another student, and you can continue going. You can start with change the word up, because maybe there's only so many words you can think of that rhymes with ease. And you may also accept nonsense words. That's still, students are still doing that substitution of that onset. And so that is giving us information. They understand the concept. Maybe they don't have the oral language to think of words that necessarily rhyme. Or you can use picture card support. And so for our English language learners, that can be really important, because they may not have the oral language yet to come up with these ideas or concepts, right? I always think if I had to do it in Spanish, I can barely speak. So I would need some support, but maybe if I saw a picture, I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. So this is one game that you can play that is a great way to develop rhyme, and kids really enjoy it.
They do. It's a fun game for them. That's for sure. And I think on we have the picture cards and things like that, but you can also think about partnering students together that may need support, so they can kind of help each other out as well.
Absolutely.
If that's needed. So when we're thinking about these games, you're going to think about your assessments that you're doing. So if you are using PALS, that's a great assessment to kind of say, a lot of my kids are going to need to work on that rhyme. So I'm going to make sure after I teach rhyme that I'm kind of like putting rhyming games throughout the day. During those games, you can almost use those as an informal assessment. If you're doing like a thumbs up or thumbs down, or we're getting ready to line up. And when we get ready to line up, I'm going to give you 2 words before you line up. So I'm going to give you cat and hat. Do they rhyme? Thumbs up. Great, go. And when I was doing this, I kind of would vary it. If I knew a student might be struggling with rhyme, I might give them 2 words that were really easy to hear. If I had another student that was really great with already the recognition, I might say to them, give me a word that rhymes with door. Okay, go line up. So you can kind of vary your entry points and levels, and it kind of gives you a clear idea. It's hard to like be playing the game and remembering what kids did, but I could quickly on a sticky note write down, okay, I need to make sure that I'm doing some more work with Carrie and Nicole around these concepts, because I had to give some additional
I have
hints.
to add in, as the dyslexia person that I am, we know that dyslexia is a deficit in phonemic awareness. And so this information is really important, especially if you see students who may be struggling to acquire letter knowledge, if they have issues even discriminating sounds. Like there's some students you might say with and with, are those words the same or different? And they'll say that's the same. And so there you'll have students on a whole progression of skills, and it's really important to hone in and to tune into those students who are struggling to acquire this, even with explicit instruction, because that is, like I say, the spidey sense is going off that there may be a deeper issue. And I am not saying we're going to go straight to a dyslexia diagnosis. What we're going to do is go straight to that extra support and that early intervention, so that maybe later on a student doesn't need a label. And so that's my dyslexia spiel that I.
And I think that, along the years, naturally, when I was teaching kindergarten, I played these games and did these things, not realizing what I was doing. But over the years, I've seen other things begin to substitute these fun things that we used to do early on that built children's ear for language. So instead of playing a game like this, I put on like a brain pop or a YouTube video for like an energizer. These can be energizers too. It doesn't have to be just getting up and dancing to music. And the power of that early intervention and this early instruction in this is going to lessen the kids that need intervention along the way. I can't
Absolutely.
say it more often. And if we ask teachers, usually when they have many children struggling in this, they don't have a lot of instruction or reinforcement in these areas. So this is why these idea of games, they're energizers, they're brain breaks, they're transitions that you can use, if being intentional as you use them, but then also support students' development in these areas.
Absolutely.
So again, we've said that, we want to make sure that they're used to reinforce explicitly taught skills. They can be done whole class. They can also be done in small groups. So maybe you have an instructional assistant and you've played the game. You could say to your instructional assistant, can you go play this game with these students? Because it's another opportunity for them to reinforce these skills. And things like this can be done even as you're lining up or waiting. We always have those moments where we're waiting in the hall for the music class to let out. That's another place where you can play just like a quiet whisper game with these.
Another thing I want to mention is that you will also be doing phonemic awareness, like specifically blending and segmenting in your phonics lessons. And that's one of those things that you should be adding in daily into your phonics lesson, because like we said, those blending and segmenting skills are the power skills. So we don't want to say like, this is your entire phonemic awareness for the day. These are just activities that you can do that are fun and engaging for kids. And they'll be done in addition to some of the other work, like Nicole's talking about the activities you embed in your day, but also the activity, that you will be doing activities in your phonics lessons that are going to really support the acquisition of those phonics skills. So that's my other.
Yeah, and we have these, even like some of these games can be used as warm up before you even get into your phonics lessons. So they're great. They're just easy ways to kind of get kids moving in a developmentally appropriate way. So this game is called Put the Syllable in the Corner. I think we came up with this idea, instead of putting baby in the corner, we're going to put the syllable in the corner.
Dancing picture there.
Yep. So that's actually a really good idea. So this is working on their idea of segmenting syllables, and you would label places in your room. So maybe you have the 4 corners in your room. Each corner has a number there. Then you're going to pass out picture cards to students. You can do this individually or in pairs or even in a small group for more support. The students segment the picture. So if they have a picture of a caterpillar, they're going to say caterpillar. Oh, that's 4. I'm going to go over to the corner with 4. Or if they have a butterfly, they're going over to the corner with 4. They hold their pictures up. You can see it's like that great quick assessment. And then they trade picture cards with another friend, segment, and play over again. The big thing you're going to want to do.
Nicole, do you know why that works? Have I told you my geeky thing of why it works with your chin going down?
No.
I can't help myself. So
do it.
When we make a vowel sound, it's an unobstructed sound. So we're not using our teeth or our lips or anything to block the sound. And so anytime you're making a vowel sound, depending on which type of vowel, your jaw is going to drop because you have to make that sound. And we know that each syllable has a vowel sound. And so that's why our chin drops. Sorry, I had to,
No, I love that you put that in there. And I think that whenever we talk to teachers about using the chin drop for syllables instead of just the clapping, you can always see them over there trying it out with words because they're trying to disprove us, I think, when they do it.
Well, the clapping, you do that, you're like butterfly, and you're like, I don't know how many claps that was, honey. That's a lot. Let's slow it down.
It's just a little bit more of that multi-sensory, they can really feel it going down. So the other thing I just want to say is make sure that you're using pictures that are familiar to students. You don't want to be passing out pictures and they're like, what's this a picture of? I don't know what it is. Because we've all had those pictures that you're like, is it a pot? Or is it a pan? Is it a hat? Or is it a cap? You're going to want to make sure that students are really familiar with the pictures. And many of the pictures that we have for our resources that we use are pictures that are used over and over again. So butterfly is also where you can think about that initial sound for B. It's for syllables. They get to see it over and over again so that they become very familiar with the pictures. This is a quote from Fontes and Pinnell, and we chose this because we really like this idea of that playfulness. And it says the entire activity should be playful and enjoyable. Too much specific attention to sounds as if a task to be done correctly not only confuses children, but also shuts them down to the delight and enjoyment of learning about language. It's a natural for children to play with the sounds with the sounds of words. Weir's study of children in their cribs revealed that children practiced new words and sounds as they lulled themselves to sleep. You want to build on this natural curiosity and help children play with sounds and words in your classroom with that same spirit of delight and discovery. So if we're really excited about words and listening to sounds, the kids are gonna be excited about it. And again, they'll be outside at recess and substituting their music teacher's name. Hopefully she's not watching this. Their name while they're out there playing, because that's what kids do. They're curious, they want to play with language, but we have to give them those opportunities to do that. So when you think about, well, where do I do this? Because we don't want to say this is another part of your day. You guys already have so much to do in your day. So think about how you can maybe replace some of the things. The morning activities, when they come in the morning, instead of sitting down to do a worksheet, maybe they're playing memory games where they're matching cards, like rhyming cards. Morning meeting activity. So instead of doing just an activity that may not be building phonological awareness, you can add in one a few times a week that does. Transitions, like we talked about, like the lining up, brain breaks, literacy stations, and small groups. You don't have to find a new part. You just are going to replace some of the parts of your day with some of these ideas.
And so
Carrie,
a lot of questions sometimes we'll get around these activities are, well, I have English language learners, and we've been talking about ways to support language learners throughout our presentation. And phonemic awareness is important for English language learners as well. If you've ever learned another language, think about, you've moved from, if you first hear it, you're like, it's a long string of sounds and you can't even break it up into words, right? And then eventually the more familiar, the more oral language development you have, you can, okay, I can hear words. Like my mother is Puerto Rican, did not teach me Spanish. And so when she's on the phone talking, I'm like, I hear that word, I hear that, oh, I heard my name. So, that's where I am in my phonological awareness. But eventually you have to be able to hear all of the phonemes in the language so that you can be able to speak and be able to use the language. And so that's the same thing for our English language learners. So the first thing, draw on words that are familiar to them. And so that's drawing on those words in those oral language. And I think what we maybe didn't say, and I apologize, I'm sniffing, my allergies are killing me up in Northern Virginia today. Phonological awareness is built on oral language. And so students have to have oral language so that they can do these activities. And so it's not that we're going to not do them until a student has a certain amount. We're going to build oral language even through these activities. But it's important to understand that that's why we want to pull familiar words that students are able to use and recognize for them to practice with. And we want to value their responses. Sometimes they may respond in their native language. Great. And that's an opportunity going into the next bullet about learning about children's native language. So when I'm doing these activities with a group of kids and I have a student, I'll be like, tell me about, I'm going to say the nye sound that in Spanish, and teach us about it. And that gives those students the opportunity to be the expert. And so it's not always like, oh, we need to help them. They can teach the rest of the group about these phonemes from their native language. Make sure you're pronouncing clearly. So just like Nicole said, watch me. Really try to, and I am guilty of it. And I always tell people, tell me when I'm doing this, is not to co-articulate. So instead of buh, it's buh, buh. So clip off that sound. Because what you'll see is if you're not, then students will be like, buh, buh, good. So it's like, nope, there's not two sounds. So be very clearly. You can provide visuals and picture cards or real objects. And so that helps connect these somewhat abstract concepts to something that is in their schema and their understanding. And then be thoughtful of how much you're teaching at one time. So we're not doing rhyming games for 30 minutes. You know, like I said, these activities are short and sweet. And the National Reading Panel recommends 5 to 20 hours of phonemic awareness instruction a year. And so that's not a lot of time day to day, but that time when used well is very impactful. And so I think we're going to do another game next, right? Oh, guess my word.
Guess my word. I think this is our last game. And but Carrie's going to just tell you this one other game, because this is another game at the top of the pyramid. Kind of what you were just talking about, actually. That.
Yeah. So this is building students' listening and blending skills. So you can tell them we're going to play a game where we must listen carefully and blend the sounds to make a new word. And then you model the word slowly, going phoneme by phoneme. So watch me. Okay. And I'm doing what's called like final blending, but you can also do what's, continuous. I got it. Yep. So like, I'm not good at continuous blending. I'm better at final blending. I've done it for most of my career. So final blending is where you're really breaking those sounds apart. Continuous blending is a lot closer to the blending that students do when they're decoding. And say them together, or you could sun. So you may choose another word familiar to the students and say it slowly to them and say, what word am I saying? So if I said, now I'm like, okay, I'm going to do bug. No, I just said it.
It's okay.
Why is it when you have to think of an example, you're like, I don't know words.
I do it all the time.
G, g, g. Okay, what's the new word? Even though Miss Lisa messed up the last time. Let me do it again. G. So Nicole, what word is that?
Pig.
Good job. You blended those together.
And I think one thing you can do then to support the English language learners is then show them the picture card that goes with it.
Yep.
You don't want to show them that first, because then they're not really having to do that listening if they already see the picture. But you could show them afterwards, and then it helps us when we start blanking on what picture that we're going to do next.
What word? So, I'm just thinking of like guitar. Like that's too hard.
Well, and I think that's the other idea, is starting with words with 2 phonemes first.
Yes.
Then working to words with 3 phonemes, because sometimes we start with a really big word and we haven't done that work with maybe just very short words. Kind of like we were talking about those bigger pieces to smaller pieces. It's kind of the same idea. Sometimes we try to start at a very high end, and then the kids are like, I can't do that. I'm like, I have a hard time with that too.
I mean, that's funny. When I do this work with adults, people will be like, this is really hard for me. I'm like, yeah, some people, and I've had a couple of people like, I may have dyslexia. I'm like, I'm not diagnosing you. But phoneme awareness was hard for me because I do have mild dyslexia. And so they can be challenging for adults. I'll be like.
And this is why when we're thinking about the idea of that listening on the pyramid, they have to have their listening skills really sharp to be able to do an activity like this.
Absolutely.
So a kid could be struggling in this because maybe they just need some more practice with just listening attentively. So think about those ideas. There could be something getting in the way, and you might need to just do some work around that.
Absolutely.
So we are at our end. We are, since we can't do questions online right now, please feel free to send us any questions you have. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today. We have some references that we have included also in here, and we hope you have a wonderful new school year that's coming up for you guys. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep.